he indicated you were upset, and you were upset with Ambassador Bolton and upset with the way things are going, and I believe your counsel said that was an outright fabrication.
Well, I think you might recall in my deposition on October 14th that I said that very unfortunately I had a bit of a blow-up with Ambassador Sondland, and I had a couple of testy encounters with him. One of those was in June 18 when I actually said to him, "Who put you in charge of Ukraine?" And I'll admit I was a bit rude, and that's when he told me the president, which shut me up. And this other meeting, it was about 15, 20 minutes, exactly as he depicted it was. I was actually, to be honest, angry with him. And, I hate to say it, but often when women show anger, it's not fully appreciated. It's often, pushed onto emotional issues, perhaps, or deflected onto other people. And what I was angry about was that he wasn't coordinating with us. Now, I actually realised, having listened to his deposition, that he was absolutely right, that he wasn't coordinating with us because we weren't doing the same thing that he was doing. So I was upset with him that he wasn't fully telling us about all of the meetings that he was having. And he said to me, "But I'm briefing the president. I'm briefing Chief of Staff Mulvaney. I'm briefing Secretary Pompeo, and I've talked to Ambassador Bolton. Who else do I have to deal with?" And the point is we have a robust interagency process that deals with Ukraine. It includes Mr. Holmes. It includes Ambassador Taylor as the chargé in Ukraine. It includes a whole load of other people. But it struck me yesterday when you put up on the screen Ambassador Sondland's emails and who was on these emails, and he said, "These are the people who need to know," that he was absolutely right, because he was being involved in a domestic political errand. And we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged. So he was correct, and I had not put my finger on that at the moment, but I was irritated with him and angry with him that he wasn't fully coordinating. And I did say to him, "Ambassador Sondland, Gordon, I think this is all going to blow up," and here we are. And after I left to my next meeting, our director for the European Union talked to him much further for a full half hour or more later, trying to ask him about how we could coordinate better, or how others could coordinate better after I had left the office. And his feeling was that the National Security Council was always trying to block him. What we were trying to do was block us from straying into domestic or personal politics. And that was precisely what I was trying to do. But Ambassador Sondland is not wrong that he had been given a different remit than we had been. And it was at that moment that I started to realise how those things had diverged. And I realised, in fact, that I wasn't really being fair to Ambassador Sondland, because he was carrying out what he thought he had been instructed to carry out, and we were doing something that we thought was just as, or perhaps even more important, but it wasn't in the same channel.
Yeah, Dr. Hill, if you mind, Mr. Kessler, sorry.
This is the former top Russia and Europe expert on the National Security Council, Dr. Fiona Hill, saying that Gordon Sondland was being involved in a domestic political errand at the request of Donald Trump, while the NSC was involved in national security foreign policy. And while this admission is damning in and of itself, what makes it worse is that it came as the result of the Republican counsel Steve Castor's line of questioning. If the best the GOP could do was get the witness to admit that Sondland was being sent on a, quote, political errand, then you can only imagine how much worse it got for the right. And rest assured, it did. Between Dr. Hill and David Holmes, the top staffer at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, yet another spate of nonpartisan government officials added to the already insurmountable evidence against the president. Holmes testified that the announcement of an investigation into Biden to help Trump's campaign was being used to steer foreign policy.
While Ambassador Taylor did not brief me on every detail of his communications with the three amigos, he did tell me that on a June 28th call with President Zelensky, Ambassador Taylor and the three amigos, it was made clear that some action on Burisma Biden investigation was a precondition for an Oval Office visit.
Holmes testified about the obvious hypocrisy of American officials pressing Ukrainians about the importance of legitimate investigations while simultaneously pushing for the announcement of a decidedly illegitimate investigation.
I was shocked the requirement was so specific and concrete. While we had advised our Ukrainian counterparts to voice a commitment to following the rule of law and generally investigating credible corruption allegations, this was a demand that President Zelensky personally commit on a cable news channel to a specific investigation of President Trump's political rival.
Dr. Hill shut down the GOP conspiracy theory pushed by Trump and Giuliani that Russia did not interfere in the 2016 election and that it was Ukraine in a desperate effort to legitimize Giuliani's pursuit of his sham investigations.
Based on questions and statements I've heard, some of you on this committee appear to believe that Russia and its security services did not conduct a campaign against our country, and that perhaps, somehow, for some reason, Ukraine did. This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016. This is the public conclusion of our intelligence agencies, confirmed in bipartisan congressional reports. It is beyond dispute.
Holmes verified that the entire issue of corruption was a front, that Trump never cared about Ukraine and only cared about the probe into Biden, according to his first-hand account of a conversation with Gordon Sondland.
A follow-on conversation that you had with Ambassador Sondland, where you asked him, I think, generally, what did President Trump think of Ukraine? Is that right?
Correct.
What did Ambassador Sondland say to you?
He said he doesn't really care about Ukraine.
Did he use slightly more colorful language than that?
He did.
What did he say that he does care about?
He said he cares about big stuff.
Did he explain what he meant by big stuff?
Well, I asked him, well, what kind of big stuff? We have big stuff going on here, like a war with Russia, and he said, no, big stuff like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani is pushing.
And finally, Dr. Hill testified to the obviousness that Burisma was simply a code word for the Bidens, that this was never about the firm, but rather a way to implicate Trump's top political opponent in a smear campaign.
I thought it was obvious to you that Burisma meant Biden's.
Yes, it was.
And you actually treated that as a pretty easy thing to understand. In fact, Mr. Morrison figured it out with a single Google search. But is it credible to you that Mr. Sondland was completely in the dark about this all summer? I mean, you had an argument about it. Didn't he say, what are you so worried
It's not credible
about?
to me at all that he was oblivious to this.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your answer.
It is not credible to me that he was oblivious.
And we could go on, but it's not necessary. Because after days of these hearings, it has become glaringly obvious that none of Trump's defenses hold water. From complaints about the processes followed by the House Intel Committee and Democrats in Congress, all the way to the right's bad faith and tenuous justifications for Trump's own illegal activities. The truth is that Trump withheld desperately needed military aid from Ukraine in the midst of a Russian aggression campaign. Ukraine was well aware that the aid was being held up. American officials were instructed to follow Rudy Giuliani's orders to ensure that the Ukrainians knew that the public announcement of an investigation into Biden was a condition for further political help, be it the release of any aid or the meeting with Trump himself. American officials knew that any mention of Burisma was simply code for Biden. They knew that the actual investigation was of little importance to Trump, that all he wanted was the announcement. Red flags and complaints were raised at numerous junctures. A whistleblower complaint was filed which, despite Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr's failed attempts to bury it, was ultimately released to Congress, at which point, miraculously, the aid to Ukraine was released. Why? Because even the Republicans knew that they'd done something incriminating. That's why they hid the transcript of Trump's call with Zelensky in a secure server. That's why they barred White House officials from responding to subpoenas to testify in front of Congress. That's why Mulvaney and Bolton and Pence and Pompeo would rather go to court and get themselves mired in the judicial system than come before the American people under oath and tell the truth about what happened. Because the truth is that Donald Trump committed an impeachable offense and should be removed from office.